Back on. All right, so on this one, you can't really see all the layers. And you can't really on this one, but the pia mater is the one closest to the tissue, following every little nook and cranny. It's very thin, but nutrients pass through it, so that kind of makes sense, right? And the middle layer is going to be arachnoid mater, and some of these vessels give you a hint of where it should be. Because the vessels travel in the subarachnoid space, and the cerebral spinal fluid also, yes. So vessels and cerebral spinal fluid are in this subarachnoid space, but you can't really see it. You see some vessels remaining. What's close though, the shiny membrane stuff that you see in certain places would be the pia mater. Arachnoid mater next, and then the outer layer is dura mater, and that you can see on this one. And if you were going to dissect this brain, it takes forever to get the dura mater off. It's that tough, super tough. So that's this outer layer you see. You can see kind of vessels underneath, right? In here, because the arachnoid mater would be next. And then again, close to the brain, you've got your pia mater. Something that this eye with the eyeballs on it can show that these cannot is that this is the optic nerve here. So it takes information from the retina, and it progresses posteriorly because it's going to go to the occipital lobe ultimately, right? Vision. But it crosses right in here. So it's crossing underneath the dura in here. On these brains, you can generally see the back part, but not the front part with the eyes attached. These are some nerves, I believe, that operate the muscles of the eye. And so, and same here, you see these little guys. So these are cranial nerves as well. There are 3 cranial nerves that operate the muscles of the eye. And then of course optic nerve. Anteriorly here, you see cranial nerve number 1. This is really kind of torn up. You may be able to see it better on your other brains, but this is cranial nerve 1. It's called, does anybody know? Olfactory.
Okay.
It's olfactory nerve. And remember when we dissected the cranium, like there was that structure called the cribriform plate. It was anterior and part of the ethmoid bone. And it had little holes in it. Those little holes are for nerve fibers that go up and eventually join in to be to synapse in the olfactory bulb, which is what this is. So you've got these little holes like little nostrils, right? Little sheep nostrils. Something else you can see on this brain with the eyes, which you can't necessarily see there, is the trigeminal nerve, which is one of the cranial nerves here. And it's got 3 different branches. And compared to humans, the proportional size of this is enormous. I mean, it's big in humans compared to some of the other cranial nerves, but when you think about it, trigeminal nerve goes to the face, and it carries sensation. It is also involved with innervating some of the muscles of mastication, chewing. So huge in these guys, right? So trigeminal. Can't see it, it's cut a little bit on this one, I think. This structure in here is the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is immediately posterior to the optic chiasm. And this is also where then the sella turcica is on the skull. So if you remember, we had on the skull, maybe I'll grab one, but we had these optic canals carrying the nerves, right? And then right behind it was the sella turcica holding the pituitary gland. So now you just see what goes into those cranial structures. This doesn't show other cranial nerves very well, but this is probably one of them. You're going to find some of them on these brains, but they're not all intact, so find what you can with the cranial nerves. And then make sure you look at the cranial nerves on the brain models, because I often use them on those models instead of on this one. Although you know, trigeminal nerve is huge, so that wouldn't be too hard to tell. But
Would you mind pointing some of the things out on that?
I would
one,
not.
too?
No, I don't mind at all. Uh-oh. So here, and maybe you could help me. So if we're looking at the outside then, with the dura mater's off, what would this region be in here? This would be, so this is posterior, so this is the occipital lobe. So this would be, yeah, and it's so tiny comparatively. Like here's where the central sulcus is. And you remember that separates the frontal lobe from the parietal, very good. But look how tiny. Oh my gosh, it's like the size of the cerebellum. Right? I know. Anyway, that's the frontal lobe. This is parietal, which is huge in comparison, right? It's parietal. Back here is occipital lobe.
Where's the line that would show the occipital lobe?
I can't find it. There is a there are some other ones. We'll go through those in class. I'll make sure we handle that in class.
Okay.
This is the longitudinal fissure here. Cerebellum, of course. The anterior bulgy area here on the brainstem is your pons. Below the pons is the medulla oblongata, which then ends up being in the spinal cord and going down the spinal canal. This region is the midbrain, but it's also part of the brainstem. So the brainstem's going from here to about there. That's all brainstem, but remember we have those three parts: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Here's the temporal lobe on this side. These are the olfactory tracts, so that's your sense of smell. Remember we saw it on the brain with the eyes because we saw the holes in the dura mater, right? For the olfactory bulbs, which are right above the nostrils, and those little nerve fibers travel upward through the cribriform plate of the skull, and they synapse and become these olfactory bulbs, which then travel. And by the way, oh dear, I'm so sorry. So these will go next to the thalamus, and these optic tracts will go to the thalamus next. This is the front part of the optic chiasm that's missing, but it makes it X. This is where the pituitary would be, approximately right there.
Do we need to know those little lumps in there, like the 4 little bumps?
Oh yes. So they look. If you look at from the posterior aspect, you see them. Mm-hmm. They look like a butt. Isn't that nice? Don't put that online.
Oh, it's on there.
But these are the superior colliculi. These are the inferior colliculi. So there are 2 on each side, right and left. So the 4 of them together are known as the corpora quadrigemina. So that's all 4 of them. These are for visual reflexes here and auditory reflexes here. And so we have several reflexes that are combined, like they take in more than one type of sensation and connect them to get a response, an overall response. But these are enormous compared to the relative size in humans. But they're depending on that a lot, right? They're like little machines almost. And all this, if you look at all this and look at the size of the frontal lobe, it's pretty remarkable. This is the cerebellum, and it's got these little ridges that are not unlike here. But these are called folia in the cerebellum. And this, of course, is the outer view of the cerebellum. Pons is on the other side of it, here anteriorly. And then if you look at the side then, this is just one side, right? But this is the superior colliculus, and this is inferior colliculus. And then the 4 together again, corpora quadrigemina. Here is the cerebellum. And remember I talked about that tree-like structure? If you look at the midline here, And so here, these are white matter tracts that make up the tree and the branches. So myelinated axons. And it's called the arbor vitae, also, which is the translation is tree of life. And then we've got gray matter in here, right? And you can't really see the difference between gray and white so much on these, but gray matter's in the cortex, cerebral cortex, which is the perimeter. Everything else is white matter. There are some locales where we have deep nuclei, so those are the gray matter cell bodies deep within, so they're called nuclei. I showed them to you on the slide for the PowerPoint. Here, looking here, then here's the pineal gland. And this region is the thalamus. Some of these brains you can see it easier, but it's kind of like this roundy disc thing is the thalamus. And I think of it as being more egg-shaped in humans. And then down here would be hypothalamus. And the pituitary is approximately here, just posterior to the optic chiasm. So it makes sense, right?
Is it there right now?
It's like here.
You guys were looking for.
What's that from right
The hypothalamus. So hypothalamus, thalamus, and pineal gland.
there? Is the pituitary on there?
No.
Okay.
It's on that one with the eyes on it.
Okay, I was
But not here, yeah. And then in here, if you put your probe in there, so this whole area is diencephalon.
Right.
This is a lateral ventricle in here. And again, some of these brains show it more. You can see it more readily. But see how it's a space in there? And what does that space hold again in the lateral ventricle? Oh, you go. Cerebral spinal fluid, exactly. The third ventricle is going to be here between the right and left thalamus. And after the third ventricle then, I don't see it very well on yours, but there is a cerebral aqueduct that brings fluid down. It's probably this.
You could see it on
Is
that
it on this one?
If you pulled that one down, you could see the ventricle
Which one?
coming.
This?
This one right here. If you pulled the cerebellum down, there's a little hole that I think is the ventricle.
Oh,
Yeah.
could be, yeah. Like right here?
Yeah.
That's a possibility, yeah. Because then it goes down, and the fourth ventricle will be anterior. It's this little triangle area. So this is the lower part of the cerebral aqueduct, and you probably are looking at it right there, I would guess. Maybe. Yeah, probably so. It would be like right here, yeah. Then this is the lower part of the cerebral aqueduct, and this is the fourth ventricle. And then from there, it goes down, the cerebral spinal fluid goes down to this central canal of the spinal cord, which is right here. In this region, we have some of the cerebral spinal fluid kind of pooling-ish. It goes in this area and then surrounds the brain as well. What did I miss? So midbrain, pons, it's not very big on these guys. Here's the medulla oblongata, lots of survival reflexes. And in fact, lots of survival reflexes throughout the brain stem, but the medulla oblongata is particularly important for that. And then there are also a ton of white matter tracts. So those are axons going from the brain down to the spinal cord that pass through here. And some of them will stop at a nuclei and synapse with the next one, like particularly sensory pathways going up to the brain. They have little synapses along the way where they might receive input from other structures as well. And conversely, the primary motor cortex would be just anterior, I'm going to say it's here, just anterior to the central sulcus. And it'll send its fibers down, and it crosses. Those fibers cross at the, they call them the pyramids, but they cross there over to the opposite side, because you've probably heard that one side of the brain operates the other side of the body, right? Sarah's over there. No, you're good. So they cross around here, but all kinds of axons are running through here, some of which are stopping the synapse. There's some direct lines that go to the cerebellum because it's so important that we can have our motor system react quickly when it's needed. And then again here, fourth ventricle, and then on down to the central canal of the spinal cord. Here's that ventricle, right? There's this little separation, a little wall here called septum pellucidum. It's just kind of just like a barrier or a membrane between the right and left lateral ventricles. And then this structure here is the corpus callosum. So if you remember back to lecture today, these are white matter tracts that are separating, or excuse me, connecting the right and left hemisphere so they can talk to each other. Sometimes when people have epilepsy, they'll cut that and it decreases, kind of calms down some of the electrical activity going on. What did I miss? Occipital lobe, of course. Parietal lobe. I think that might be everything you needed to identify. I recommend, though, that you go back through now and identify them for yourself. You can even use some